Welcome back to another episode of Cape Ann Today. I am with Lisa Hahn, the Executive Director of the Rockport Performing Arts Center, Windhover. And I'm also with Windhover board member, Duncan Hollomon. Hi, you guys.
Hi,
Hello.
nice to see you.
Nice to
Good
see
to
you
be here.
this late spring, almost summer day. And I know things are really winding up at Windhover. But first, Lisa, I would love for you to give us a short history of Windhover and tell us maybe what the mission is and how that mission has evolved.
Your dog's stealing the show here. So Windhover started back in the 1960s with my parents having a vision of creating a performing arts center for the community where dance, theater, music, and poetry would be accessible. It started out as a girls' camp with 60 girls and 20 faculty, and it morphed into a nonprofit in the 80s. When it was a nonprofit, dance was really the focus and the thrust because my mother's background was as a modern dancer and choreographer. So she drew in lots of dance companies, including her own, that performed most weekends. We always had some theater and some music, but dance was really the thrust and the focus. Since my mom's passing 7 years ago, I've really led the mission in a new direction, and I am bringing theater, poetry, all kinds of music, and all kinds of dance, flamenco, tango, ballroom, salsa, ballet, all kinds of modern, into the mix. And we're also exploring interdisciplinary work where dance and theater can coexist, where music and dance can coexist, and where the interlacing of these different art forms can take place. So it's more experimental, but it's also much more diverse in terms of the offerings that we're featuring.
And Lisa, tell us a little bit about how you connect with so many different companies, because you just described a range of dance. So how are you meeting these people and bringing them to Cape Ann?
Well, I spent most of my life living in New York, immersed in the art world, but also seeing lots of theater and dance. So my connections there are very strong, especially with the dance world. So I would say most of the dance companies and some of the theater companies are companies that are based in and reside in New York. And then again, it's like networking. Certain dance companies have told me about other companies. So I've included some tango from Argentina and hooked into a whole community in South America through some contacts in New York. So I'm really trying to just stay on top of contacts in New York and who else they would recommend.
And the actual look of Windhover still is the absolutely charming old school Cape Ann, little shingled buildings, and it feels in the locust trees, it feels so intimate and beautiful, but you have changed some things. So tell us what you've some really nice changes. Tell us about that.
Sure. Well, and yeah, Duncan, you can chime in too, because Duncan's been part of the changes. We have I guess the main change for me has been to have raised the money for a permanent tent covering over our outdoor stage in our back garden, because for 50 years, every time it looked like there'd be rain in the forecast, the stress level would just increase and we'd have to bring the performances indoors, and there was never enough space for large audiences there. So this has really been a major new direction for me, to have an outdoor tent large enough to accommodate an audience of 200 and the stage and all of the actors or the performers, musicians, dancers as well. We also got a grant from the Mass Cultural Council to build new bathrooms that were handicap accessible. And in the process of doing that, it really did transform the facilities and the look in what I find to be a very it's a vision in keeping with what my parents did, meaning the buildings are small, they blend into the landscape. Care was taken in creating a structure that would actually blend in well to the landscape and to the barn.
It blends in so well, it's hard to find. I mean, it's right there in the middle of all those buildings, but if you've been to Windhover before, you don't see anything new. And it's really charming. You've done such a great job with all of that. Yeah. So Duncan, do you want to add to this conversation?
Oh, sure. So one of the things that intrigued me about it was that it has a kind of Brigadoon quality. I was new to Cape Ann. I moved here about 2 years ago now, but I'd been coming up periodically. I lived in Cambridge prior to coming up here, and meeting Lisa and discovering this sanctuary for the arts that also had this kind of charming quality to it that was just tucked away. And it was just such a treasure for me to discover. And I really wanted to try to be of use if I could. I have a background in theater, made my living as a performing artist for a number of years, switched to law, and I paid my way through law school by singing in restaurants. And then I became a psychotherapist. So I have a number of threads to my background, all of which sort of come together in a way at Windhover that allows me to be useful to facilitate conversations, to help design the bathrooms because I'm reasonably handy, and to help shepherd Windhover into its new era. And in the conversations that Lisa and I have had, I'm relatively new here, so I didn't know her mom. And I think there are lots of folks here that are more like me. And there are lots of people that knew her mom and have a dedication to the place that goes back decades. And we're trying to move people from both kinds of communities to be able to come together in this new phase in the life of Windhover.
So, Lisa, why don't you just say a few more words about your mom? Her name, Ina Hahn. I happen to know her name. And she was really just revered in a particular community on Cape Ann and in New York too, as I understand.
Yes.
So tell us, and tell us about her connections also to New York.
Right. Well, she had her career in her 20s on Broadway, in all of the musicals that were from the 1950s. So she made her stage name when she replaced Gwen Verdon in the original Can-Can. And so she was the lead in that production for quite a while because Gwen hurt her back and her leg in one of those moves where she was tossed across the stage the first week the show opened. So my mom was like the new kid in town that suddenly emerged as the star in Can-Can. So she went on to continue with Jerome Robbins, Agnes DeMille, lots of major choreographers of the musicals of the 50s. And then when I was born, my parents decided that they did not want to raise a family in New York. And my father was a big sailor. My parents had spent some parts of their summers in Cape Ann. And so they decided to move here full time. So 1957, we moved to Rockport full time. And my mother continued her dance, but in a very different way. She started her own dance company. She was connected with Harvard. She had musicians and composers from Harvard that worked with her. So it was experimental dance and music and some theater, all under the umbrella of my mom's name. So she continued to choreograph. She taught at Boston Conservatory. She taught at Bradford College and other colleges nearby. And once Windhover was born, and once that was formed, then she choreographed and performed at Windhover, and she taught at Windhover. But I think what allowed people to revere her was that she was very connected to the community here. She was also creative she was a co-writer of the Battle for Pigeon Cove Harbor, which was a musical that was launched by several of her friends from the area. And Joe Mulholland, who was a composer that she had met, did the music for it. So there was this feeling of connection to the community, a story that was important to people, lobstermen as well as residents here. And it became a real token for what Windhover could be, which was how to combine dance and theater and music in a story that connected to the community. So that really pushed her into new directions, and she started creating a lot of narratives like Folly Cove designers and issues that mattered to her in the form of dance.
So interesting. And yeah, so I think so many people remember that the Folly Cove design dance that she did, right? It may not call that. And the Battle of Pigeon Cove, that's the right name, right?
Right.
So, yeah, and I think when she passed, people that was still fresh in the history of Windhover, that really immersive sort of feeling about Windhover and the community.
Yes, and I want to continue that.
Yeah,
but it's also
go on.
It's part of what attracts me to the mission of Windhover, because I'm so interested in collaboration and having people come together. And I've done musical theater, doing summer stock, where the actors and singers and dancers come together, they do a show, but it's not really related to the life of the community. And here it's intimately grounded in the life of the community of Rockport and Cape Ann. And that's something that I really find both intriguing and important, to ground what we're doing at Windhover in the life of the community itself. And so we really like having local people come in. we're hosting the Lane's Coven theater group, for example, this summer. Last summer they sold out every single show they did, so we're happy to have them back. But they're a high quality local theater group, and that's really what we're about, is creating high quality, locally based performing art.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about programming. Tell us what's happening this summer. Lane's Coven is coming. I love them. Local Shakespearean group. They also have been doing some other sort of theatrical productions, but they're so talented, young, and energetic isn't fair. They're talented. They're really great. So, but tell us what else is happening at Windhover.
Yeah, so they're performing The Importance of Being Earnest and Romeo and Juliet for several weeks, Wednesdays through Sundays. So there'll be lots of performances for people to access.
Okay. And starting when?
They're starting at the end of June with The Importance of Being Earnest.
Okay, great.
Yeah. We have a lot of different dance companies coming throughout the summer. We have one in residence right now at Windhover, which is a company based in New York City. They're ballet trained, but they also have a modern twist to them. So they call themselves contemporary ballet with a twist. They'll be working with point shoes, toe shoes, in the outdoor stage, creating they've been working all year on a new piece, which will have its premiere this week. Thursday and Friday, they're going to be performing at Windhover. We also have...
Excuse me, Lisa, this is being recorded on May 30th. It may not get released until next week. So
okay.
Miss that date, but that's okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots going on though. Yeah. So we also have a dance company that has never performed at Windhover before, except for one of the dancers who did some solos at Windhover last year that I just loved. So I followed her and was introduced to the company she's been working with in New Hampshire. So they will be launching their performance on June 23rd. And it's a mixture of different pieces and different music, and several different choreographers from the dance company will get to shine. And then we're featuring, and Duncan may want to speak to this more, 2 different music concerts in early June. June 8th is Joe Mulholland, who was chair of the Harmony Department at Berklee School of Music, and jazz is his thing. He's had a connection to Windhover since the early 1970s. So it's really a tribute that he is coming back to perform his work and jazz stable, some jazz pieces that people love, along with a very talented violinist named Rob Flax, who will be performing with a actual blue violin.
And Joe wrote the music to the Battle for Pigeon Cove.
Yeah, I thought you had just mentioned his name, Lisa. And in fact,
Yes,
I had been, browsing through your site. So I saw that Joe Mulholland was performing. And I thought, wait a minute. And
you
he
know that.
Pigeon Cove? That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Same guy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think what was Michael O'Leary in the original company as well, Lisa?
Yes, he was in the Battle for Pigeon Cove Harbor as a singer, actor, playing one of the fishermen.
Yeah.
He's not the storyteller.
Yes.
Yeah, the Irish Celtic singer.
Celtic singer.
So talented. My
So
God.
Yeah.
So
And just a sweet guy.
Yeah. I just know from the his story, The Cricket. I think it's about a cricket.
Mhm.
Oh,
He's an amazing storyteller. Yeah.
huh. Cool. Yeah. So Joe will be performing, as I said, June 8th. And then we have a string quartet called the Sheffield Quartet from Boston, who have never performed at Windhover before, but I'm really trying to bring in more classical music, not in a competitive way with the Shalom, but to try to find small chamber groups that haven't performed at Shalom, that may be more new to the scene, and give them some space to perform classical music. So they'll be performing on June 9th, Friday night at 7:30.
And just an interruption about them, that is, they will be performing in the chapel, which Lisa's dad built. And so they're interested in more intimate settings for the kinds of music that they do. So it's really not appropriate for the outdoor stage, but it's perfect for the chapel. And we've hosted a number of performances there as well. And Lisa can talk more about the chapel, perhaps.
Yeah. Tell us about the chapel, Lisa.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been in it, because it's been an underutilized space, but it is my favorite building on the property. My dad was an antique collector, and he owned a couple of antique stores here that some people still remember, like the Sacred Cod was his. The sign is still there, but it's a private residence in East Gloucester now. And he was passionate about stained glass windows and all kinds of wrought iron balconies and gabled roofs and different kinds of what, you would just call, idiosyncratic aspects of New England architecture that were not of great value when he collected it back in the 1960s and 70s. Now there are stores like Architectural Salvage that actually make their living finding these things. But my dad would just go to estate sales in New Hampshire and Vermont and Western Mass all the time and just find buildings that were being torn down and buy up the building. So in this case with the chapel, he bought actually a church that was being torn down and hauled the windows back. He hauled the paneling from the church back, and he resurrected and built and created a chapel on Windhover's grounds from those architectural fragments and remnants that he fell in love with. So it never had religious significance. We never used it as a private family chapel at all, but it serves a wonderful purpose for spiritual gatherings, for meditative kinds of groups, for intimate music concerts like we're launching this summer, as Duncan articulately just spoke about. And we're hoping to use it much more for other kinds of experiments with music and dance and theater.
We also had a collaborative evening with the Gloucester Writer Center with poetry. And we had, 40 or 50 people there, and we were serving wine and just sat back and listened to some beautiful poetry. And Lisa, remind me of the fellow that spoke about Vermeer.
Jay Featherstone.
Okay. And he's just such a lovely man. And oh my God, what an amazing poem. So, and we did a video later about his reading of that poem.
Beautiful. I know Jay Featherstone. He is a lovely man and excellent poet.
Mm.
Mhm.
Well, if people want to catch up on exactly when these performances are and what time and all that, where can they get information?
So the website is the best place for that. It's www.windhover.org. And that's WINDHOVER.org. And I emphasize the H. It's a bird that hovers on the wind, as opposed to a construction company that riffed on our name and is called Windhover without the H. So I just want to make sure people understand the difference there. So windhover.org has a link to the events calendar. You can click on any month and everything that month will appear.
Great. Well, let's catch up this summer. Let's hear how it's all going and see, maybe you'll have some reviews for us.
Wonderful.
All right. Well, nice to meet you, Duncan.
Oh, such a pleasure. And come join us at Windhover.
Yes.
Oh,
And Heather, if you do make it to Dogtown in September, Duncan is one of the actors playing one of the characters in Dogtown.
oh, well, okay. So we need to catch up and talk. And you,
Many hats.
yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, great to meet you and great to see you, Lisa. And we'll talk soon.
Okay. Thank you, Heather.
Thanks, Heather. Take care.
You too.
Interested in a sponsorship? Email sponsor@1623studios.org to learn more.